Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 24/7. I'm Cody Goodwin. We've got the band back together. Mike Rodak, Alex Scarborough. Going to talk a little Alabama, Wisconsin football today. First road trip for the Crimson Tide headed up to Madison, Camp Randall Stadium. Guys, have you packed your socks and belts?
I actually have. I got ahead of the game. I already did it.
I'm a last-minute packer. I'm very arrogant that way. Like I feel like I'm always fine. So I'll just do it an hour before I leave, and I leave as little time as possible for me to go to the airport. I don't know. It's never been an issue. I lived in a mid-sized airport city in Buffalo. I live in a mid-sized airport city in Birmingham. In both cases, I live pretty close to the airport. I leave an hour before I need to be there. I'm usually fine.
The other thing, too, is when you travel as much as we do sometimes, if you forgot something, you'll be back in a couple days. Like, you'll be fine. I asked that because we got to talk to Jamarcus Shepard, Alabama's receivers coach, and of the many things he discussed, everybody's asking him, hey, how do you prepare for the first road game? I think they were more talking about how to prepare for Camp Randall and the loudness and playing in a Big Ten stadium and playing against a Big Ten team in Wisconsin and all that jazz, because he was a longtime receivers coach at Purdue, and he came back with, I hope the guys pack their socks and belts. A lot of times they forget their socks and belts. And if they have their socks in their belt, then I know that they're ready, because those are the little details that I need them to pay attention to. So just wanted to make sure that we were all paying attention to the details for the first road trip of the season.
I just like the receivers to get open and make a play other than Ryan Williams. But
it all comes full circle. We'll touch a little bit more on Alabama, Wisconsin later in today's show. Wanted to begin the show today with some injury updates. Kalen DeBoer on the SEC teleconference gave a couple of updates, both of them encouraging for the most part. One on receiver Cole Adams, said that he's probably doubtful for Saturday's game, had a pretty gnarly elbow injury in the South Florida game, had a catch late in the game. Elbow snapped in a direction that it was not supposed to, but it sounds like he's on the road to recovery and could come back earlier than maybe we even anticipate. We're not doctors on this show, but we all saw that his elbow buckle didn't look great. The actual injury that I wanted to discuss was that of Caden Proctor. Has been dealing with a shoulder injury that he sustained in the warm-ups of the first game of the season. Hasn't played yet. DeBoer seemed pretty optimistic that he could potentially play on Saturday, and that's kind of the discussion point that I wanted to get to here. Caden Proctor starts at left tackle. I think the question is, who do you plug in at right tackle? If not, then the question is, what are the expectations for the offensive line? Mike, I'll throw it to you first, just kind of open-ended. How do we feel about Caden Proctor's injury, the state of the offensive line going into this weekend?
Yeah, I feel like if he's close enough to where he feels okay playing through whatever lingering pain or discomfort there might be, then I think you play him. I don't think this is a game where you err on the side of caution. And obviously, like, this doesn't seem like an injury where there's a significant risk of like re-injury or something that by putting him out there, you're all of a sudden putting him at jeopardy health-wise. Like, typically, I think you err on the side of caution if it's a concussion or something like that. But if it's something where it's just a pain management, pain tolerance issue, then you put him out there, and this is a big game. I think by all indications from what DeBoer said, like, he wanted to play last week. He was close to playing last week, and I would imagine they pumped the brakes a little bit just because it was South Florida and they didn't necessarily need him. I think you need him more in this game, and I would expect him to be out there. I think that's been the signal all week. He's practiced, which helps because then you have the practice reps and experience during the week against the scout team defense. So that's where that seems to be heading. And I know people at right tackle seem to be really high on Elijah Pritchett because he played 6 snaps at the end of a game when South Florida was basically had surrendered at that point, and they had a couple big plays and he looked good. And people tend to forget that he didn't look so good in the Western Kentucky game, playing through an injury. I think that was late second quarter when they had the bad snap that he suffered that. He lost a fall camp competition to Wilkin Formby. By all indications, Wilkin Formby was going to start at right tackle. regardless of whether Proctor injured himself in warmups or not. Pritchett also, I think, had a chance to kind of win that left tackle job in the start of fall camp. I think there was a legitimate idea that if he was good next to Booker, then why not put him out there and see what he can do? And that's where he was to start fall camp. And Caden Proctor took him over pretty quickly. Elijah Pritchett also had a chance against Caden Proctor last season when Caden Proctor didn't look good and did not win that either. So there's a long track record, much longer than the 6 snaps that we saw Elijah Pritchett against South Florida, that there might be better players. There's a much bigger sample size with Wilkin Formby versus Elijah Pritchett than just this past game. So while people might think Wilkin Formby is trash and he needs to sit on the bench and Taco Casa's trash and they're just willing to throw this guy in the dumpster after one game, it's not necessarily what the reality is. And I think coaches look at things a little bit bigger picture. And Wilkin Formby looked like he belonged, through spring and fall. That's kind of why he was at that first team spot. I mean, granted, in the spring, they were very thin on numbers, but he was ahead of Elijah Pritchett in the fall. You're talking an entire month of fall camp in August. So that's kind of where I would expect it to be. I don't know if if he has it by birthright that he must stay at right tackle for the entire game, but again, that's from the indications from listening to Tyler Booker, and Tyler Booker gave me some indications last week about his own position. I would read between the lines and say that he's kind of giving a hint that Wilkin Formby is going to be playing at right tackle, not Pritchett.
Regarding Proctor, DeBoer said on the teleconference this week, he's been practicing. He's doing well, doing a good job. Really was headed in a really good direction right at the end of last week. Turned the corner, I think, there, is in a good spot there. Done a nice job the first 2 days of practice. If we assume he's going to take over at left tackle, Alex, I'll throw this to you. What do you think Alabama should do at right tackle? I'm not sure that a place as loud as Camp Randall on the road against Wisconsin is exactly the atmosphere you want to rotate at right tackle, but is that a possibility, or would you rather see them plug one guy in and just let it go, or what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, it's a really good point about the road environment playing a role in this. I think if the game was at home, you'd see probably a series here, a series there. But I think everything Mike said is correct. I think Wilkin has earned the right to fail at this point. I think he should be the first one out there, and just understanding that the leash is very short. And if it's looking like he's going to be an issue with penalties again, or he's going to give up pressure via the rush, then you go ahead and you give Pritchett the opportunity to fail. And I think you just figure it out from there. It's obviously not a great place they want to be. I will say the optimistic part of me thinks that what South Florida did in terms of sending the blitz and having a lot of athleticism that they could throw at Formby, I don't know if Wisconsin can necessarily replicate that in the same kind of way. So maybe this is a better game, a better matchup for Formby than USF was. But I think you try to get Pritchett in there if you can late to get some reps, because you do have the Georgia game coming up. You do have Tennessee, and you really need to know what you have. So, yeah, I think Formby is probably the starter. And again, if it looks dicey, I don't think they'll hesitate to pull the trigger.
Wisconsin's got, according to Pro Football Focus, 22 pressures through 2 games, but that's also against Western Michigan and South Dakota. So not exactly teams that have the same talent that Alabama has in the room. So I guess that's obviously a key thing that we're going to monitor. And we may touch on it a little bit more when we talk about Alabama, Wisconsin here coming up. The other thing I wanted to get to, Alex, you wrote a story this week, Jalen Milroe progress check, just kind of where he's at through the first couple of weeks, what he can do more. You asked Kalen DeBoer a question this week, just what they've seen on film. What was kind of your takeaway from DeBoer's answer about evaluating Milroe through 2 weeks, evaluating the offense through 2 weeks, and then who and what can do better moving forward to just make the whole operation a little bit less clunky? I guess I'll phrase it that way.
Yeah, I wanted to say give a grade, but there's no A through F grade. It's just TBD on Milroe, it feels like, because of the way both games have played out. We talked about it extensively after the Western Kentucky game. Jalen did exactly what he was supposed to do. It's all big plays, and he made them all. So do you learn anything from that? I don't think so necessarily. And then obviously the South Florida game, where it wasn't great, but you wonder how much of that to put on him because the pressure was so bad. people diving at his feet, getting their hands on him. And then on top of that, the penalties putting them in really bad situations on second and third and long where any good quarterback would struggle. But at the same time, we've seen that he's got room for improvement. So I thought it was interesting. I asked, Kalen a very simple question through 2 games. What do you like? What do you think needs to be improved on? And I think he's 600 words of answer. And it's like, there are plays he likes, and he really harps on when Jalen does what he's supposed to in terms of scrambling, but keeping his eyes downfield. That's a really positive in his mind. And that's something that I don't know he did super effectively at times last year. But the thing that kind of reading between the lines of what Kalen said that he wants to see more of is when they have the option, the RPO game, where he can throw the ball out quick to the receiver, he can hand the ball off to the running back, or he can take it himself. He wants to see him be more confident in terms of just get the ball out there quickly to the receiver, let him make a play. That's why he was so happy with that touchdown pass to Ryan Williams, because that was confidence in terms of doing that. And Kalen said, look, it's not just confidence on Milroe's end, it's confidence in the receivers that they're going to make a play. So I don't think you can lay it all at Milroe's feet, but there's also no doubt that there are things like that he needs to improve on. And talking to Nick Sheridan as well, trying to get the offense in a rhythm, right? And those, high percentage plays, big plays have been there, but they need those in between plays where they can sort of create a rhythm offensively. And I think not necessarily more important than that, but what goes along with that is get some confidence in Jalen throwing the football, in just making those simple passes. So a lot of room for improvement. It's just really hard to put a grade on Jalen at this point because of the way both of those games have played out.
I think my read of the situation is that Milroe's strengths, we know what they are. We've talked about them at length. He mentioned the escaping the pocket, or, running up toward the line of scrimmage and manipulating the defense because of how dangerous he is as a runner, and using that to his advantage to then create some big plays in the passing game. We saw it Kendrick Law touchdown. We saw it in the LSU game last year. Like, those are things that he is continuing to do. And that's good to see, because he wasn't doing those things earlier in the season last year, right? So that just naturally, okay, he's starting from a higher point this year. How much further up can he get? The other thing, too, that I kind of took away from DeBoer's comments is that it's a lot of the little things that they're maybe continuing to struggle with. Some of that's on Milroe, right? Like we discussed this as well, just making sure that he's getting the offensive line in the right protection, making sure that he is making the proper throws. Alex, I think the way you phrased it in the preseason was just doing the meat and potato stuff, doing the little things. The other thing, too, is that, that's not just Milroe, the offense as a whole, right? We mentioned the offensive line and all the penalties from last week's game, but another play that came to mind, and it was actually the fumble inside the 5-yard line when they're down near the goal line. Milroe had to motion twice to get Kendrick Law to move in motion. And you wonder what kind of play that was, what kind of timing, and how that, having to do that twice to get the receiver's attention to go into motion. How much does that ruin the timing of a play? Does that throw Brailsford off because he's not able to snap it at the time? Like, all these guys have these internal clocks, and maybe I'm overthinking it, but that little thing kind of stood out to me as I was rewatching the game. Just like, I wonder how much having to do that twice just made the vibe weird around that play. And I don't know if that's directly the cause for the fumble. I think we've all seen the snap right now. Jalen just dropped the ball, but it makes you wonder just mentally, what does all that mean? Mike, I want to throw this to you because I know you have quarterback thoughts just about Jalen Milroe's progress, and you're smirking right now, which makes me wonder how much contact you're going to make on this softball that I'm throwing up to you.
I'm going to bunt it to the shortstop and see what happens. But look, I think it goes back to the spring. I remember Tyler Booker talking in the spring about just how much motion and shifting there was pre-snap in DeBoer's offense. And I think even DeBoer talked about it on that Athletic podcast this week, how a lot of plays, they're getting under 10 seconds left on the play clock because they're doing so much before the snap. And that's what he wants to do. That's Kalen DeBoer's calling card, is sending all sorts of guys in motion, kind of changing the picture for the defense at the last minute, and then trying to get a guy into an open spot and take advantage of a weakness in the defense. That's what he's good at as an offensive coordinator previously, and now an offensive head coach. So is that, again, I don't know. And they always say this, every coordinator comes in, and he's not a coordinator, but he's a head coach. They say they want to mold their system to a quarterback. They're going to do the best they can with the personnel and, fix and make what their system is fit the personnel. It doesn't always happen. Like, I think that's always kind of a goal. It's always kind of a pipe dream, but at the end of the day, coordinators want to do what they want to do, and they have their own vision for their offense. I don't know if Jalen Milroe completely fits that. I don't know if he ever will completely fit what Kalen DeBoer wants to do offensively. And there's going to be a lot of variability, a lot of, to use a baseball analogy, like he's going to swing for the fences a lot. Whether it's running the ball or throwing the ball deep, and there's not going to be a lot of the singles and doubles that move the chains. And that's something that you keep hearing DeBoer say is move the chains. And he mentioned on the podcast, he's like, sometimes when we try to move the chains, it's a 74-yard touchdown. But he didn't say this, but other times it's an 18-yard sack. It can be pretty ugly, or it can be pretty. So that's kind of the boom or bust nature of this offense. That was true last year, even with Tommy Reese. And I think they would really like to have it be more controlled, be more, all right, here's a 7-yard out, boom, first down, let's move the chains. Next thing, and I just don't know. I feel like Milroe has that want to make a big play, and he has the capability to do it. And the ball is in his hands a lot. I know people on our board talked about it. We all talked about Kendrick Law all offseason, and through 2 games, he has 2 touches, 1 run and 1 catch. And in fact, Jalen Milroe, of all of Alabama's ball carriers, if you will, has the most touches because he's had 22 runs. And that does include sacks, but that's more than what the running backs have had. That's more than any receivers had. It's more touches than anybody. So the ball is in his hands a lot. The results can be very good, but sometimes that takes away from putting the ball in other guys' hands. Mm-hmm. Nick Saban hammered home with him last year. Be a point guard, distribute the ball. That's something we're hearing now from Kalen DeBoer, again, on this podcast this week, where he's saying, we need to take less off of, or take more off of Jalen so he has less to deal with and put the ball in other people's hands. So it's kind of the same message. I just don't know if it's ever going to come to fruition with him totally, just because he's a 4th-year quarterback and he just kind of is what he is. Like, I don't know if it's ever going to look totally different than what it looks like right now.
This analogy might crumble. I'm beginning to wonder if Jalen Milroe is James Harden, where the offense is him. There's no flow. I don't know that we're there yet. I don't know that is set in stone. But this is, how many games are we talking about? 15, 16, 17 games where we have the offense is him. He doesn't you don't watch it and go, man, he's really orchestrating the offense. He's really putting guys where they're supposed to be, get him the ball, let him go make a play. Consistently, that's not there. And I was trying to think of an analogy, and James Harden's the guy because it was just isolation ball. I mean, he could hit a 3, he could put up 50. He could also have a bad night and not put up 50, right? And because he didn't do the things like get in the lane, kick the ball out, and make another player better, I feel like there was always a limit on his game. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure Jalen's there. My fear for it is that I haven't seen him progress to the point where he's Steph Curry, where he's getting the ball out. He can make plays on his own, but he's also making other people better. And that all comes back to me to playing within the offense. He is the offense.
That's a good analogy. I think there's still time with him, but these next couple of weeks are going to be huge. The Wisconsin game on the road, the Georgia game at home. You can kind of stretch it out a little bit and include the Tennessee game in the middle of October. Like, this is a big stretch to kind of see where he's at. And I don't know, like we'll find out. By Halloween, I think we're going to have a much better understanding of where Alabama's going this season, where Jalen Milroe's going to be playing next year, whether it's the NFL, whether it's college. If it's college, I don't know if it is Alabama. Like, this next month, I think is going to go a very long way to determining that.
Well, and I wonder if that's when we should maybe revisit this conversation, because think about his college career. He's been there for 4 years. How many different offensive coordinators has he gone through? He's only 2 games in with this coaching staff. Are we maybe premature in trying to make like definitive declarations on this. I think personally, I think so, because we saw how much growth he made over the course of last season with yet another new offensive coordinator. Maybe that's part of me just trying to be optimistic, but I wonder, like, there's still growth, I think, to be had here. And even if he plays really well or even really poorly in the next 2 games, I think if it's really poorly, maybe it's a different conversation. But I feel like the next 2 games will show him what more he needs to grow in. And then I think maybe ahead of the second bye week is when we need to revisit, okay, where is this guy at really? Because then there's a much bigger sample size of him working with these coaches, playing these games. And then maybe that'll tell us a little bit more about, okay, what is the actual ceiling of this offense with that quarterback?
Look, this is our version of the Dak Prescott contract controversy all the time. Like, we're just going to have to deal with it. And it's because we've seen the great of Jalen Milroe and we've seen the limitations, and it's hard to turn away from that. So we acknowledge that this is all TBD. We acknowledge that the first 2 games are only 2 games, and there were good and bad in both. And there were reasons for the bad in both. But ultimately, this guy's a Heisman Trophy contender. He's under a microscope, and I think he would tell you himself that's where he wants to be.
Mentioned on the podcast too that there's a film crew. Is it Improbable Media? Do you guys know about this?
Yeah, it's Jay Williams.
Yeah, following Milroe around, and look, there's a lot of attention on him. So I don't want to say it's self-inflicted, but I think like he's accepting some of this in. Like, I'm the guy. Like, I'm Jalen Milroe. Like, I'm the quarterback at Alabama. So with that comes a certain amount of, you got to go out and perform. And I think the one thing not the one thing, but the biggest thing he's done really well is avoiding interceptions. In the past 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games, he's thrown 1, and that was that Kentucky interception. And the offense as a whole was avoiding turnovers really from that, was it Tennessee game in last October all the way down to Georgia. And like, they were very, very, very clean. And I think that helped Jalen Milroe kind of rise up in terms of how people viewed him by that Georgia game, especially. I think some of that has eroded, not the interception part, but the offensive turnovers because of his fumble against Michigan. And then what we saw, the 3 turnovers against whoever they just played, South Florida.
Be fair, the only one of those turnovers was on him.
I'm saying the offense, but for the offense to look clean and maybe it wasn't prolific and that it was like 500 yards every game, but they were controlling the ball. They were protecting the ball. That's what they did best against Georgia. So if the offense starts creating turnovers, and again, one of those was on a return by Kendrick Law, but you have the turnover number go higher. I think that becomes a problem. Specifically, if Jalen Milroe starts throwing picks, that becomes a big problem. And he hasn't done that for a while. Like, he's really cleaned that up, because that, I would argue, is what got him benched last year, the 2 picks against Texas. That's what caused people to question him more than anything else. So again, you're playing, Wisconsin has that safety that our friend Tony loved to ask about all week, Hunter Wohler.
They also have an All-American cornerback in Ricardo Hallman. Like, it's
right.
a pretty good secondary that he's going to play this weekend.
You're playing Georgia with Malachi Starks and some of the dudes they have at Georgia, who are also pretty good, I've heard. So these next 2 games are also like, Jalen Milroe throws a couple picks in these next 2 games. That's, I think, really going to affect kind of where people view him. But if he plays really clean, even if he's only throwing for 170 yards, I think he's in a better spot than throwing for 200 yards, but throwing 2 picks.
Oh,
okay.
Look, my semi-ridiculous hot take is I hate talking about interceptions with quarterbacks. If the interception is trying to throw a guy open and trying to be a quarterback and make plays, I'm fine with it. It happens. I don't like when quarterbacks get tight and they're trying to be perfect and there is no fully offense. And I worry that is a little bit of what's going on, is that we're only throwing to guys when they're wide the bleep open. And to win big games, you have to take risks. So if you throw a pick or 2, that's fine. I mean, honestly, I'm okay with that. As long as it's not a dumb mistake that puts you in a terrible position. But I'd rather see him go out there and throw for 300 yards, have 3 touchdowns and 2 picks, than 150 yards, 1 touchdown and no interceptions.
So
That's not
I
playing.
have a quarterback I want to sell to you. Can I pitch to you a quarterback right now? I'm going to do it. And this quarterback, he had 273 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions.
Mhm.
2 of those interceptions were pick sixes.
Yeah.
Do you like that stat line? 273 for 3 and 3?
But I'd like to see a quarterback go out and try to make plays. Look, I acknowledge that it's a semi-ridiculous hot take to say I don't care if a quarterback throws interceptions. But there's a ceiling to that, right? There's a limit on it. But I want to go out and try to make plays. And that's the thing. To me, I see Jalen Milroe make the high percentage play or the play. If you're throwing the ball 50 yards down the field, how often is that ball intercepted? Not very often.
Right.
So I want to see him try to fit the ball over the middle. I want to see him do those things. And if it leads to a pick, fine. I want to see you grow as a quarterback. So do that. The one thing I will say, again, in Jalen Milroe's defense, I think we talk about all these things schematically. After seeing Shadur Sanders throw in his entire offensive line under the bus and then Dion back over him, it's nice to see. It's maddening for us, but also nice to see Jalen Milroe has never blamed anyone else once. Not Seth McLaughlin last year, not Parker Brales for this year, not the offensive line, not the receivers, none of it. So I do give him props for owning it, but if you throw a pick, fine, I don't care.
That stat line was 273, 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 2 of those being pick sixes, 61 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. That stat line belonged to Tyler Buckner in the 2022 Gator Bowl versus South Carolina. So you want a quarterback that does some of that. That's Tyler Buckner.
Okay, here's my retort. We all agree Nick Saban's the greatest coach of all time. Nick Saban saw that game and went and got Tyler Buckner.
He did. And then I couldn't find those stats because when I searched ESPN, it was only showing me Tyler Buckner's receiving stats because he's the only wide receiver. So I couldn't find his passing stats on ESPN. But that Gator Bowl was Tyler Buckner's Super Bowl. And I think there's something to what you're saying. Like I probably busted on Tyrod Taylor in Buffalo, who was a similar quarterback that wanted to run the ball, was a little bit more controlled, didn't take a ton of risks. I always said if he was throwing more than 30 times a game, Buffalo is going to lose, and they need to find a quarterback who can take more risks. And now they have Josh Allen, who just throws the ball around the yard. And I think there's something to that. And he throws a lot of picks, but there's a much higher upside. So there is probably something to that. But I think right now what's helping the perception of Jalen is the fact that people aren't seeing these interceptions and aren't seeing these bad interceptions that they saw against Texas last year.
And I don't think either one of you were around for Jalen Hurts. So this is going to be an old comparison. But I remember when Jalen Hurts was in the Alabama offense throwing the darn ball around. And then he threw a couple picks, and then he threw a few more, and then all of a sudden he got tight. And everything changed after that. And he was never the same quarterback in an Alabama uniform. I think he lost some confidence because he was thinking too much about throwing turnovers. Then what happens? He goes to Oklahoma where Lincoln Riley doesn't bat an eye. Throws 9 picks that year, and he's a Heisman finalist. Like, he was a completely different quarterback when it appeared, I'll preface it saying it, when he appeared to not be worrying so much about making the perfect pass all the time. That's what it sometimes looks like to me with Jalen Milroe. And maybe I'm looking at it through Jalen Hurts' eyes. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not sure that I am.
And look, I think part of this is we're also carrying over the Rose Bowl. And 2 of the last 3 games, the offensive line has not looked good.
Yes.
Milroe has not looked good behind that offensive line. There were 6 sacks in the Rose Bowl. There was 3 sacks for 36 yards in this past game. Like, Western Kentucky game in between, but 2 of the last 3 games that we watched, it just has not looked like, I would say, the 3 games before that. Well, if we're taking out the Chattanooga game, that was the Iron Bowl, the SEC Championship, Kentucky, and at the LSU game. I think the LSU to Georgia stretch last year is when Jalen Milroe went from to like, woo, this guy's pretty good, like Heisman contender. Like that was a huge stretch. And I do feel like there's a little bit of, Aaron Murray used the word regression, but like I feel like there's a little bit of backtracking on some of that perception of him right now.
And there's the problem with talking about Jalen is every argument has a retort. So I could say there would be fewer pressures if he got the ball out quicker.
Right.
But does he have the receivers to get open? I don't know. I mean, that's the issue. If you have a faster offense, the pressure's not getting there. If you roll him out, I don't know. Maybe all of this completely goes away and he throws for 400 yards against Wisconsin and he beats Georgia again. I don't know, but it's just really hard to talk about Jalen because what we've seen is so convoluted yet so successful. It's just really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I think once a month, I'm just going to lob the quarterback grenade in between you two and just mute my mic and watch you guys go back.
I don't think
that was really fun.
I don't think there's much disagreement. It's just, it's trying
about the same thing.
Right. It's trying to figure it out because like we were all talking about the crap he wasn't doing right last year. And then he goes out to Texas A&M and throws the ball around to Jermaine Burton all day and they look great. And again, we were all talking about how great he looked against Georgia. And then he goes out against Michigan and it wasn't there. So it's just game to game. Where's that consistency? What's the read on him? And it's changed. It continues to change.
Wanted to pivot now. Alabama, Wisconsin. That's the game on Saturday, 11 a.m. kick. Game's going to be on Fox. Big Noon's going to be there. We're going to be there, more importantly. Alex, I'll throw this to you first. What are you most looking forward to, or what's the biggest matchup of interest when you think about this game?
I was going to say cheese curds or Culver's or something like that. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I've never been there before, so I'm excited for the trip. I hope everybody's kind of you enjoy that piece of it. But the thing that interests me most, aside from Jalen and trying to make another analogy that's semi-interesting, is the offensive line, not the Proctor Formby thing, but just how do they function in that environment? Because the last 2 years not been great in those kind of settings. So are they going to be a better, more functional unit, less mistakes than what we've seen, false starts, all those things? Can they figure that piece of it out? And then will Wisconsin, like I said, I don't know if they have the athletes to use the USF playbook, but how much of that will they try to replicate in order to get Alabama off its game? And can they put pressure on Milroe? I have a sneaking suspicion we're going to get some more designed runs out of Milroe, some more rolling the pocket to try to negate that. But I think it all starts up front with this game, especially after what we saw against USF.
I agree. You make a good point about the penalties and the communication. I think back to the Alabama A&M game last year at Kyle Field, 14 penalties for basically 100 yards for Alabama in that game, a lot of them along the offensive line. Mike, when you think about Alabama, Wisconsin, is there a matchup that comes to mind that's going to intrigue you the most on Saturday?
Not one in particular. I think it's in general Wisconsin's mentality of this is a really big game for them. They are like, I wouldn't belittle Wisconsin. Like they're still a Big Ten team. There's still talent there. They're still going to be big. There's going to be a crowd behind them. Like it's a formidable opponent. I know there's limitations to what they have talent composite wise. I think they're 27th on 24/7. Where Alabama's number 1. So I think Alabama still can put more speed on the field, more overall talent. I think there's a lot of capability for Alabama to break some big plays against them. But I thought that last year against Michigan. And, 2024 Wisconsin is not 2023 Michigan. But at the same time, like you have to respect them to be at least a mid-tier Big Ten team with some big dudes. And what is it? Grizzly Bears, whatever Jamarcus Shepard said, like that offensive line lining up. And it's an experienced offensive line. Alabama has an experienced defensive front. So if you're looking for one matchup, I think that could be it. I think Wisconsin, even though they've morphed into a passing team, I think their ability to run the ball is still going to be important. It's honestly, I think it's just Wisconsin, their ability to show up, show that they belong on the same field, And if they can start pushing Alabama around, if they, I don't want to say surprise Alabama, but you start getting punched in the mouth by, a fifth-year offensive lineman from, Muskegon, Michigan, or one of these dudes they're going to throw out there with a, red beard, and they're going to push you around. Like, I don't know. We'll just have to see how it looks. Like, that's going to be their home turf, and you're going to have a crowd behind them for that. So it's just going to be different. And I think that's something we even heard from Alabama players last year, like going to Tampa, playing in an NFL stadium. Dallas Turner said it was just different. It was a different feel. And I think going to a Big Ten stadium is just going to be different. It's going to feel a little bit different. Just how Alabama responds to that, if they come in with a thought that they're an SEC team and they're just going to run all over them, like, they may get knocked down a little bit because of that. I don't know if that's what they'll think, but again, I just don't think you can trot out Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams and expect, just because you have some superior talent, some superior athleticism, that you're all of a sudden going to be able to beat them. I think you're going to have to play this game in the trenches still and really get into a battle with them.
I got two thoughts. One, your image of the everyman from Wisconsin sounds hysterical. I need a full sketch of this.
I was looking at some of these dudes, but they're all, they're all.
You just Google Wisconsin man, or
no? I mean, it's
everybody either looks like Chris Long or Connor Stallion.
Right. I mean, Jake Renfro, Joe Bruner. Joe Bruner's got a mullet. He's got a beard. He's from Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin. You got Joe Huber. He's from Dublin, Ohio. Jack Nelson. He's from Stoughton, Michigan. Who else they got over here? Riley.
He's just reading the roster.
Yeah, this fifth-year dude from Lakeville, Michigan, or Lakeville, Minnesota. Like, a bunch of lumberjacks. It's you better watch out.
Oh, that's really funny. No, the second point that I wanted to make is that I'm glad you brought up the battle in the trenches, specifically Alabama's defensive front against Wisconsin's offensive line, because the passing numbers through the first couple of games from Tyler Van Dyke and Phil Longo's air raid offense, not the most impressive, right? Especially when you add in the fact that they played Western Michigan and South Dakota, like not exactly the toughest of opponents. That said, Tyler Van Dyke's a guy that's been around the block. He's a guy that at one point was being recruited out of the portal by Alabama, like allegedly. Sorry, no tampering. Who tampers? Still, though, this is a guy that's been around the block. He has shown previously while he was at Miami that he's got a pretty good arm. He can make all the throws. And I think what's interesting about the matchup in the trenches specifically is that if Alabama cannot get this guy off of his throwing platform, if they can't make him uncomfortable, there is a young secondary or an inexperienced secondary that's still trying to fully gel together, playing on the road in what's going to be a very loud environment. All of that to say, I think some like those young corners we saw.
Do you think you're going to stop that? I mean, look at that mullet and that beard. Like, this is the sort of Wisconsin offensive lineman that you have to go up and beat. That's what you got to do. I'm just saying.
Florida man runs from the cops and gets arrested and deals with drugs. Wisconsin man grows a beard, drinks a bunch of beer, and eats cheese.
Chops down some trees.
What I was saying, if they can't get to Tyler Van Dyke and make him uncomfortable, that back end better hold up. And I think that's probably the most intriguing part about the battle in the trenches when Alabama's on defense, is that we saw those young guys give up some pretty open deep routes. I'd like to think Tyler Van Dyke's a better thrower of the ball than Byron Brown. If Wisconsin hits on some big plays, this game gets really, really interesting, really, really fast. I think that's what intrigues me the most about that particular matchup.
I think that's possible, but I do think there was a wrinkle in terms of those missed big plays with USF and why the tempo really got them in a difficult situation. Longo likes to do that, but not to the extent that Golish does. And the substitution piece of it as well just throws another layer on top of it. Not to say that their offense doesn't present challenges. I just don't think they present the same challenges.
And then on the flip side, Wisconsin's defensive front has struggled getting after the quarterback. I think what gives me maybe a little bit of confidence in Alabama is that Wisconsin doesn't really play quarterbacks that have the dual threat ability like a Jalen Milroe. I think when I was talking to Badger 24/7's Nick Osen earlier this week, I just straight up asked him, I'm like, when's the last time Wisconsin played a guy that can both throw and run in the same game? And he went back to Cam Ward. That was back when he was playing at, I believe it was Washington State. And yeah, you look at that game, he had a pretty good game that day. Washington State ended up winning the game. So could be a pretty big Milroe game. I'm also really curious to see that Wisconsin secondary against Alabama's receivers. I think this is going to be a really stiff test for them. We talked about Hunter Wohlers, Ricardo Hallman. Those guys are really, really good players. How does Ryan Williams handle that in addition to what's going to be a pretty loud and rowdy atmosphere? Could this be the Jeremy Bernard breakout game? Could this be one of those where it's like, hey, let's rely on the veteran a little bit more while the freshman figures some stuff out? I wonder if this could also be maybe a bigger tight end game. I'd like to see them get a little bit more involved in the offense.
If Alabama wants to take some of the pressure off of Jalen, if they want to get this offensive line going, there's a very simple way to do that. Run the ball. Give the ball to Justice. Give it to Jam. Get positive yardage on first down. Put them in a better situation. I could see Alabama trying to lean on the ground game a little bit more in this game too, especially on the road.
If I was a better podcast producer, I would have queued up Brent Key's "Run the Ball" from week 0.
It's my favorite clip of the season so far.
I love it. I need to figure out a way to like put sounds in the podcast so that we can start doing fun stuff.
Mike's figured out a way to put visuals in the podcast.
That's right.
Watching.
Yeah, the people, why I broke up laughing, for those of you listening through your podcast feed, you need to go find the YouTube video of Mike putting a picture of one of the Wisconsin players.
Joe Bruner. He's from Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, which is right near Fox Run in Deer Park.
I imagine he consists on bratwurst and cabbage.
That's right. No, I think it's like all big game hunting out there.
You guys have never been to the Midwest before, or like, man, you're going to get a kick out of this.
I've been to the Midwest. I've covered games in Minneapolis and Green Bay and Chicago, and
I've flown over it.
I've flown over Iowa. I can safely say I've never been to Iowa. I have no reason.
You don't need to stop in Iowa unless you want to watch wrestling. But that's the idea that you guys have this preconceived vision, more so Mike, this preconceived vision of what a Wisconsin man looks like. It's just kind of funny.
He is looking at the roster. He does have some evidence to support his argument.
You know who else is a Wisconsin man? Is Nate Oates, who does not look like Joe Bruner. So, I wonder if
Nate associate Nate more with like Detroit.
Well, he was there for a while, but he grew up in Watertown, Wisconsin, which we're going to drive right by when we go from Milwaukee to Madison on Saturday morning.
He's already planned out the route. I'm impressed.
That's right.
He's not only does he have his socks and belts packed, but he's got the route ready to go for us to get to the game on Saturday morning. 11 a.m. kick on Fox, Alabama, Wisconsin. Should be a fun one. That's all we've got on today's show, guys. We'll be back Sunday to recap that game. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 24/7 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 24/7 and 24/7 Sports for more hard-hitting analysis on quarterbacks and socks and belts and Wisconsin men, like you heard on today's podcast. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon.